And I think we'll get started. By the time I get through our land acknowledgement, we'll have some late stragglers and then we'll get into things. At NATE, we honor and acknowledge that the land on which we learn, work, and live is Treaty 6 territory. This place is a traditional homeland for the First Nations and Métis peoples, and today we are all part of this treaty land. The traditional name of this place is Amiskwaci Waskigun, which we also call the City of Edmonton. Everyone, I'm very, very happy to have Aaron Cruikshank joining us today. He is a pro at market research, and that's what he does. That's his business. So he's going to lead us down this path. I know our Blue Book students, you have one more assignment due before Christmas, and that's on Sunday, and it is secondary market research. So this is important. So I'm going to pass it over to Aaron. I'm going to mute, and then we'll get going.
Thanks, Cecile. Lovely to see everyone. I want to acknowledge that I'm visiting you here from the unceded territories of the Katzie and Stolo Nations here on the Fraser River in British Columbia. It's a beautiful part of the country, and we do quite a bit of work with those communities ourselves, and definitely encourage you to, if you have opportunities to work with your local Indigenous communities, to do so, because it's always very rewarding to work with them. So. Great. Well, with that, I want to jump into the presentation. So I want to make sure, I've been told I got about half an hour, and then we'll leave lots of time for questions. One of the things, so I sent Cecile a PDF copy of my deck in advance, which I think she can distribute when we're done here. At the end of that deck, I've actually included some QR codes to about 6 different training videos that we use internally at CTRS to train our team members on doing this very thing. You're under, of course, no obligation to view them, but I just thought, hey, I've already recorded them, might as well throw them in. Hopefully there's something useful in there for you. So feel free to take a poke around in there and take a look at what we've got. So first question, can everybody see the deck all right? Is it up? You can see it? Okay, perfect, thanks. So what we're gonna do today, so this is, I'll just very quickly talk about CTRS and what we do. So we're in the market intelligence business, which is a little bit different than market research. So a lot of folks mix us up with a market research company because some of the methodologies we use overlap with market research. So we do primary research, which is the main purview of market research companies. But I'd say the vast majority of the work that we do is actually secondary research. So what we're doing is we're using research and analysis to give market signals to companies so they can make better and more informed decisions on the future of their organization. Been in business for about 19 years, worked with over 700 clients all over North America and even overseas. And we were very proud last year to have become a certified B Corp. So that's a pretty big international standard. There's almost 6,000 companies now that have the B Corp standard. I think we were like number 3,600 or something, so we're a little late to the party. But if you want to learn more about B Corps, there's lots of information online. Got a few logos of companies that we work with here and organizations, and yep. So the main thing that I want to talk about is how oftentimes we're using the wrong tools for the job when we're looking at making strategic decisions. And we look at what Peter Drucker here said, really about majority of the information you want to focus on is information external to your organization or your project that you're trying to do. And most people are really focused on the internal data. They're looking at business intelligence. So this is data from their customers, sales data, internal metrics. I would say vast majority of companies, when they're looking to move ahead with something, are really hyper-focused on this. Then they might get into market research where they're doing customer surveys, market surveys, meta-analysis of existing market research. But the challenge is that all of this really does is tell you what's happening today with the company, with the clients that you've already been able to get, and what's happened in the past. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. One is if you're relying on this entirely, you're actually not figuring out what companies or what clients you could be dealing with, right? If you're only selling to the people that you normally sell to, you're missing a great opportunity to potentially be selling to someone else. So that's why this is important. And then there's sort of a gap that ends up happening here where, you find out, okay, what's happening internally with our business intelligence, and then you're supposed to jump directly into strategy. Sorry, let me back up a sec. So you start with your business intelligence, market research, and then you're supposed to jump directly into, well, here's the strategic solution. Here's what we're going to do here. In your case, a lot of it would probably look like a go-to-market strategy with the projects that you're doing. So what the secondary research does is allows us to bridge that gap, to close the gap between the business intelligence and market research and strategy. So I understand you've been doing some calling around to prospective customers. That would be market research, right? Looking at your own internal financial plans, that would be business intelligence. So what we're trying to do with secondary research is try to predict the future a little bit, to show how customers or users' behavior might change, or maybe to discover segments that you're not selling to today that you could be selling to. And also to provide context, to look at that operating environment that you're going to be operating in with your new business, and to see how customers see competing solutions. And that's going to be a recurring theme I hope most of you look at, is your competitors for your business are what your customers say your competitors are. It's not if you say, yeah, it's me, I've figured this out, I know who my competitors are. That has to be aligned with what your customers think your competitors are. So we're always looking at things like that. But in a nutshell, market intelligence, if it's done right, allows you to make strategic decisions with insights about what's coming and how it will create problems and opportunities for you in your business. So current state, and Cecile and Dale, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. This is what I understand you guys have done so far. So you have identified the problem that you're solving. You've drafted a lean business model canvas. You've done an idea napkin. You've done some information gathering interviews, and you've done some competitive analysis. Does that sound about right? Okay, great. So that's great. That gives me a sense of where you're at. Now, what all of this adds up to is, in my mind, is a market hypothesis, right? So you've got an idea of who's going to buy, why they're going to buy, what they're going to buy, and then what secondary research is going to do is you really want to go out and gather some evidence that your hypothesis is correct. Like, okay, I think this is what's happening out there. I think this is how this business could make money. Now I need to go gather some proof. So let's talk about what that looks like. So normally at this stage, you'd be looking for evidence that supports your hypothesis so you can go to a go-to-market strategy. Now, if you're not familiar with the go-to-market strategy, I'll just explain that really quickly. What a go-to-market strategy, it's sort of like a sales and marketing strategy that says, this is how we're going to get that product or service into the hands of the customers. We're going to find them, we're going to buy ads, we're going to sell on Amazon Marketplace, we're going to hire salespeople. They're going to call, if it's B2B, maybe it involves emailing or calling people and saying, yep, hey, I want to sell you some stuff, and here's why you're going to buy it. But that go-to-market strategy should outline all of that for you. But really at this point, what you're trying to find research is to answer a very important question. Will people buy what you think they're going to buy in the numbers that you need for this to be a success? A lot of the math, back of the envelope math that you'll be doing at this point will be based on the sales numbers, right? Gross sales numbers, saying, okay, well, my baseline operating costs are going to be this. I got to pay myself. I got to rent an office. I got to have some inventory. Whatever the business is, you've got some baseline costs that you need to cover. So obviously, you need to make, even if you're going to do it break even, you need to make at least that much money in sales. So that's sort of one of the big problems I'm sure that you're looking at right now when it comes to the business opportunity is, can this thing make enough money to be a viable business? There may be other questions that are in your mind about the business that secondary research can answer, but for most people, this is the number one question. If I build it, will people come and will they open their wallets? So in order to do that, we generally turn to secondary research. So we're going to talk today about 3 types of secondary research sources. One is open source intelligence. So that's basically finding things that are lying on the ground digitally online that you can download, read, get information from. The other thing we're going to talk about is subscription data sets, which a lot of you should have access to through the NATE library. I was able to confirm that you do have access to IBIS World, for example, but there may be some other subscription databases that Non-students you would not have access to unless you paid for it. So it's actually a great opportunity to be looking through those things now because they cost a lot of money. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is calling around for intel and data. It's a bit of a lost art these days because everybody wants to do everything online, but it can be very efficient to start making phone calls and saying, hi, my name's, Jody, I'm looking for this information. I'm not sure where to start. Can you help me? And there's people in different levels of government that is their job, is to find that data for you. So we're gonna talk about that. So what am I looking for when I look at these problems, and what I suggest that you look at with these problems is you've got this market hypothesis. You want to use your desk research to do two things: to prove your hypothesis correct or incorrect. So you might have some questions about, are there enough people in that market? Is the total addressable market big enough for this service in this geography or industry, right? So let's say, I'm just going to pull an example out of my butt. So let's say you're selling canopies for people who like to do disc golf in the rain. Okay, so you're like, are there enough people who do disc golf in the rain, and that would be willing to have disposable income, that this is a serious enough hobby that they're going to buy these canopies? The geography is going to be important because you're only going to sell those in markets where disc golf players get soaked a lot by the rain. So Pacific Northwest or Nunavut, I don't know. Or you might say, we're going to sell canopies to marketing people in the surfboard selling market, right? So they want to go to trade shows at the beach, sell surfboards. So, okay, so surfboard industry, where do people surf? So you can kind of see how you're going to put parameters around that question. It's not just who will buy it. It's like, what are they buying? Where are they buying it? And do they fit certain industry demographic stuff? Like, if it's B2B, are they in a certain industry? If you're selling to consumers, are we talking a geographic area? Is it just Canada, or is it all of North America? Or is it specific cities? Is it communities of a certain size? So these are all the things that you want to take into consideration when you're asking your hypothesis. So you're going to write down some questions that you want to answer at the beginning of this process. That will guide all of your secondary research. The other thing that I always recommend is you do a pestle analysis. So this is looking for those environmental factors that maybe you don't think to ask about. So pestle stands for political, economic, social, technological, economic, and legal. There are tons of articles online on how to do pestle analysis, but it's really not that complicated. I think it's sort of advanced Googling, looking for, is there any new legislation that's coming up around surfboards or whatever example that you're using? Is there tariffs or tax policies that are going to affect that thing if you're trying to export? Economic growth. So if you look at, we're going to talk about IBIS World Reports in a bit, but IBIS World Reports tend to have economic driver factors that they'll name to say, well, housing builds are driven by this happening in the economy. So then you can go, okay, is that happening in the economy? Is that forecasted to happen in the economy? Because that's going to affect what my sales numbers are going to look like. If that metric heads into the negative, that means my forecasted market size is also going to go down. So interest rates, inflation, disposable income, unemployment rates, all of those things, especially with consumer goods, have a impact. If you're selling something that is, there are certain goods that it doesn't seem to matter what's happening in the economy, alcohol, lottery, tobacco, all of those things people buy no matter what's happening in the economy, but other things tend to be affected by that. Social, are there social trends that are happening? Are people more health conscious? Are they trying to do, like I would say the whole work from home movement post-pandemic is one of those social issues. So what's happening with the work from home movement, is that going to affect what you're trying to sell, right? If you're selling desks, obviously. So you can kind of go through these on your own, but this framework, what it forces you to do is look at the broader context of what's happening out there in the market. So you don't have to be exhaustive. I mean, for us, when we're doing pestle analysis for a client, we'll probably spend 20 hours with a junior researcher looking at these 6 factors. So you can kind of do the math and go, okay, so we're going to spend a few hours on each one of these, nothing too crazy. But it's just about checking online to see what's potentially coming down the pipeline that could affect the market that you're in. Now, sources for these things, and one of the QR code talks that I've linked to at the very end of my presentation, which you're going to get a copy of, shows exactly, I do a walkthrough on a Loom video of where to find these things. But one of my favorite go-to sources, government statistics, federal and provincial. The provincial, like the Alberta stats, OSI, they are basically using a stripped down version of the federal stuff. All the stats data originates at the federal government, and then provincial governments will do like their own version of it that only looks at, say, Alberta stuff. But you know, if you're looking at selling into the US, the US stats are just as good as the Canadian stats, and they will sometimes they'll label things differently, but they'll talk about a lot of the same factors. So I think government statistics portals are good. Corporate websites, you know, a lot of the bigger companies, they're going to telegraph what they're doing next, what's coming down the pipeline. If they've got some exciting development that they're trying to push, they're going to be talking about it online. So it's worth looking at. What are they planning? Industry associations are one of my favorites. So industry associations are a not-for-profit that represents the interests of an entire industry. So it might be something like home builders or car body repair companies or web developers. So all kinds of industry associations out there, but they produce and publish a buttload of research. And that's research, again, that's just lying on the ground ready for you to pick up. So definitely check out industry association websites. Conference agendas are another one that I really like. If you really want to know what's sort of the bleeding edge for a given field, usually conferences are trying to do something where they are keeping the conference attendees aware of what's coming that's going to be big. So if you even look at the agenda at what the topics are, sometimes that'll give you clues as to what's coming. Now, that conference might be put on by an industry association, or it might be put on by a government body that's trying to accelerate research in a specific area. There's a bunch of different conferences that are on, but I definitely think looking at conference agendas is a good idea. News articles obviously are good because people put out press releases and whatnot about things that they're trying to do. And then academic journal articles are another one. So if you're trying to find out what is happening in terms of especially technical or scientific things, if you want to know, is there something disruptive coming down the pipeline that's going to affect an industry, academic journal articles, you're going to be looking at stuff that's 5 to 10 years out, but it's probably good to be aware of. Now, one of my tricks, I think, is to figure out what those industry terms are and keep evolving that list. So you might start out with an initial list of terms that you want to look at, and then you might end up going down a rabbit hole partway through and going, oh, okay, I thought it was called this, but once I started looking into it more, this industry actually calls it that. So now I'm going to start looking for that term. So it doesn't need to be an exhaustive list, but I think it's good to sort of keep a bit of a running list of what terms are related. And I'm a huge fan. Our OSINT manager is a library scientist, and she's always driving this home. Librarians love this stuff. So I think a lot of times they're bored at their job, and especially now that books are sort of passe. So I always think it's a good idea to talk to your local librarian at the university or at the local public library and ask them, you know, like Vancouver Public Library, for example, has, I think, half a dozen research librarians, and you can go in there at no cost and ask them to help you pull stuff. And I'm sure the Edmonton Regional Library would have a similar service. So definitely worth trying to see if you can trick a librarian into doing your homework for you. Don't tell Nate. Subscription data set. So what is that? So there are a lot of really terrible ones, but the two that I tend to lean on the most are IBIS World. Like we have a paid, we pay thousands of dollars every year to have access to this. You guys get access to it for free as students through the library at NAIT. Definitely think you want to look at this. The intel and the analyst reports that IBIS World produces are top notch. It's what the banking community in Canada uses when they're doing investment assessments. It's their gold standard for that. So and banks are pretty bloody conservative. So if they think this is good data, I think you can rely on it as well. Statista, I know they have free hints at things that are online. I don't believe that you guys get paid access to it through the library, but I think there are like individual project plans you can get where you can actually, I think it's like a couple $100 or whatever, but Statista also has industry reports like IBIS World, but they're not as tightly defined. So you might be able to find something on, say, tiny homes or work from home trends or things like that. So it's definitely worth looking at what Statista has and seeing if there's a way you can get access to it. The one thing I want to caution you about is I call these Indian book reports. Now, we call them that because the companies that produce these are mostly out of Pune, India. For some reason, I have no idea why they're all there. But what they're doing is they take people out of undergrad business programs in India and just put them in these boiler rooms and have them crank out these effectively book reports. And they're really, really low quality. But they have really good search engine optimization. So you're going to run across these when you're doing your desk research. They're going to be from companies like Technavio, Research and Markets, Grandview Research, Allied Market Research. All these companies are the same, and they do absolute crap work. So don't get suckered in, because they will gladly take your money and give you something that's very poor quality. So we lots of times we'll get clients coming to us with these and going, look what I found, and then I got to have this talk with them and go, okay, let me explain to you why these are hot flaming garbage. But but you are going to come across them when you're doing your desk research. So just be aware of what they are and what purpose they serve. Lastly, my secret weapon really, and this is something that a lot of researchers don't do, is picking up the phone. And I know it's sort of, I'm a little bit older, so maybe I'm more comfortable with picking up the phone, but I think for the younger generations, I've noticed I have a lot of people on my team that are in their 20s and early 30s, and they don't like making phone calls. But I'll tell you, it is an amazing resource. So if you can kind of put on that journalistic mindset and go, I get a question that well, actually, one of my staffers is a former CBC journalist, and she found it amazing when she started with us that she would have weeks to get answers for some of these questions. At CBC, she'd show up at the office at 7 a.m. and have to start working on a story that was going live at 3 p.m. And she'd have to dialing for dollars, right? Calling around, hey, I need to know about this. I got to talk to a tow truck driver about, crowbars or whatever it was. So I think a lot of times this is a shortcut, right? So there are, let's say, and my usual thing is I tell my team, if you're not finding what you need through an online portal in about 10 minutes, pick up the phone and call somebody there and go, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know. Because you could easily burn 2, 3, 4 hours of your time digging around on somebody's website trying to find stuff that you could easily get directed to with a 5-minute phone call. So that's really what I'm talking about is if you get stuck, especially if it's a government agency or an industry association, they're happy to take your call. I also think as students, you get a lot more leeway for those kind of calls than someone like me does. I've even seen researchers in my profession that will pretend to be students to get people to send them stuff that they normally wouldn't. They'll go, hi, my name's, I'm not saying this because I'm doing something totally stereotypical here, but I'll be like, hi, my name's Aaron, and I'm doing a term paper on this, and I just need to find out some data, and like, try to sound, you could try to sound very juvenile. So yeah, don't try to sound super polished and professional when you call as a student. It's actually better if you sound like you don't know what you're doing, because they'll go out of their way to help you. There's a lot of goodwill in the community for students, so I would leverage that right now while you got that going for you. But yeah, don't be scared to pick up the phone and tell them what you're looking for. Lots of times they'll just go, you know what, let me just email you that file. And then you're like, oh, great, you just did my homework for me. So don't be scared of the phone. That's the big take-home message. I know I've said that like 6 times now, but I feel like I still need to keep saying it. So now what? You got your data. You need to turn it into some answers. I think the best thing to do is read every major finding and say, so what? How does this impact my hypothesis? Does it prove it? Does it disprove it? Is it relevant? Can I throw it out? You always want to be asking, so what, at the back end of this when you're going through your data. So what? What does this mean to me personally? What does this mean to this business plan I want to look at? I also think it's a good idea to go back through, oh, I got a GP, that's supposed to be a go typo. Go back to the questions that you originally wanted answers for, and actually you can slot the data that you find under those questions, almost like bullet points, and go, how many people in Canada are buying turtle wax, right? Okay, I've got an answer for that. How many people with no hair like Aaron Cruikshank are buying turtle wax for personal grooming reasons? Okay, it's this percentage, right? So you can start to layer up data under these different questions. And then really, once you've got the answer, so one of the things you might find, and I find a lot of people get to this point at this stage, is they actually go, oh shoot, I didn't do one piece of research to answer one of these questions. So that's why I think it's valuable to go back and try to re-answer your own questions, because you may have missed one, and it might be an important question. So laying them out in that way can be helpful. And then at the end of the day, you're using this as a creative brief for yourself that goes into your go-to-market strategy, because all the information that'll be in your secondary research here, combined with the work that you've already done, is all of the information you need to do your go-to-market strategy. That you should have all the data that you need at this point. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of actual clients that we work with. So this company, Shelter Co., I changed the name because they would be embarrassed if they knew I was talking about this. Shelter Co. Had this idea for, and this is a picture of the actual product here. It's almost like a surfboard material, so a high density foam with a PVC shell over it. And it forms together almost like an igloo. It's quite big. I think it's 20 feet tall in the center. But the idea would be lightweight. You could fit an entire 500 square foot dwelling inside a half size sea can and get it somewhere. And it would be about $20,000, and it could last for up to 20 years. So this lady here that's standing in there, it was her idea after spending some time in Haiti after the devastating tsunami and hurricane, and looking at the terrible state of the emergency shelters that these communities were getting. So she believed that there was a market for this $20,000 emergency shelter that was modular. What we found very quickly after we started doing our desk research was that the price point, $20,000, was about 10K more than the market could pay. So we found very quickly that IKEA is one of the largest distributors of emergency shelters in the world. And they have, I think for $2,400, they have a flat pack emergency shelter that can house a family of 8. And it's actually something that they're giving away. And really the big take home was, is it actually a $2,500 shelter? No, it's probably actually a $10,000 or $15,000 shelter. The problem is that IKEA, this is part of, like, they're one of the, they're actually, IKEA is technically one of the largest nonprofits in the world. They use almost all the revenue that they make to subsidize emergency shelter type activities overseas. So this was their main competition, and they had no idea because they'd done no desk research. So they're out there trying to sell this $20,000 shelter that is just so much more expensive than people are willing to pay. Now, what we did see was we looked at a bunch of potential markets for this technology, and what we saw that conference and events, now this was pre-COVID, and I know that market's starting to come back up. It was bad timing because we gave them this advice right like the year before COVID. But meeting and events and conferences, they need quiet spaces for meetings. So a lot of what happens at these conferences is somebody will rent a hotel room at a nearby hotel, empty all the hotel furniture out of it, and then set it up as a separate meeting space. But these guys actually had this stuff that looked like chicken wire that was an electronic sound dampening technology that was just something they had laying around the shop. They didn't really know what to do with it. But we sort of realized, oh my God, like if you took this modular construction, made like a little igloo that could go on the trade show floor and set up like a little living room in it, and you get into it and you flick a switch and cone of silence. You can't hear anything that's going on outside. People can't hear anything that's going on inside. So we started talking to folks in the event services industry, and they got very excited. They wanted to buy this right away. They're like, how many of these can I buy? When can I get my hands on them? So we were able to find a pivot, thankfully, for these guys to help them get into a different market. But the emergency shelter thing was a complete dead end. Now, the really unfortunate punchline of this story is they'd already spent $1 million doing these prototypes and buying up patents and things like that were pretty much money that they'd flushed down the toilet at that point, because all of it was, very little of it was reusable for this new market pivot. So that's the warning here is if you don't do this stuff early, you can waste a whole bunch of money on a market that doesn't really exist for what you're doing. So that's one example. I also want to talk about FoxFab. So FoxFab, this is an actual company name. I think they got bought since I wrote this case study. So there was a regulatory change in British Columbia back in 2017 that meant, so like if you had a hospital, there'd be a backup generator to say, okay, if the power goes off, obviously the life-saving equipment that's in the hospital still needs to run. People still need to breathe, all that kind of stuff. Picky, I know. Breath privilege. But the new regs said you have to take that generator offline once a year and inspect it. Now, and in some applications once a month. So the problem was, though, if you take that generator offline and the power happens to go off while the generator is offline for inspection, you're boned, right? So the new regs, so what they started to say was, okay, what about this roll-up generator connector? So sort of, I don't know if you've seen when they do film work, they always have these cables snaking all over the sidewalk, and they got these gas-powered generators that are making electricity. So the idea is that you have a separate junction box with switches where you can hook up one of these movie set roll-up generators. So while the main generator is off, this thing is running, ready to go in case the power goes off, right? So great market opportunity. And one of the things that we found, though, was it was really hard to sell for existing builds and much easier to sell for new builds. So part of our market intel was around how hard is it to implement, what are the barriers to acceptance, and all that kind of jazz. And we were able to find, okay, so your real target market are people building new critical infrastructure buildings like hospitals, banks, data centers, telecom hubs, catching them with this product, the roll-up generator connector and load bank connection, when they're designing the building and building it. So big lesson here, you can identify a future need based on regulatory change and kind of think about, okay, well, if that rule changes and the market goes this way, do I have something that I can offer that'll help people meet that new regulation? Oh, I guess that was it. That was a little bit abrupt. Yeah, that's it. Look at that. 35 minutes, I did it in 31. Boom. We got another half hour. I'm totally open to questions at this point.
I'm sure there's a few questions for you. Let's just give them a second.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah.
Got one in the room here. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. When I'm doing secondary market research on Google, like when I'm looking for case studies, businesses case studies, marketing strategies, or growth strategies, I usually find a lot of articles that don't really share much relevant information. Like let's say I'm looking for a case study on Nike's recent campaign. It's going to be articles and research about case studies, and that's kind of like general information. It's nothing exactly what I'm looking for. How do you guys find what you're looking for when you're searching online?
That's a great example. Case studies are largely useless because they are marketing. They're marketing materials really for the company. So a case study often is an opportunity for, say, like a marketing agency in the example that you use to show off, well, this is what we can do. But you got to think they also don't want to give away any competitive intel. This is the double-edged sword of case studies, because if you show everybody how the sausage is made with a case study, that means somebody else can pick that up and go, oh, that's how those guys did that award-winning campaign for Nike. So there's this delicate dance between showcasing what they can do and giving you valuable information that you need versus providing competitive intel that's going to screw them later, right? So what you're looking for, what we try to find are other indicators. So we might say, look at things, you got to be a bit sneaky sometimes. So sometimes we're looking at things like job boards and going, well, how many, or LinkedIn, and say like, how many people in the organization have this title, have the number of people with that title gone up? So for example, one of our clients is London Drugs. A couple of years ago, we were able to identify for them that Amazon was looking at getting into the prescription sales business because we saw that they'd hired 350 pharmacists in their US hub. So why would Amazon need to hire 350 pharmacists if they weren't looking at getting into the prescription drug selling business? So it's a little bit like reading the tea leaves. So I think the best kind of research, like it would be lovely if somebody just handed us this stuff and it was perfect and we're like, yeah, all right, that's exactly what I was looking for. But unfortunately, it tends to not be that smooth. And what you're really looking for are indicators of drivers that would give you the kind of intel you're looking for. So who have they hired? What kind of job titles? Have they, I always like looking at annual reports. Like if it's a public company, do they have an annual report that talks about the strategies that they're doing or the investments that they're making? Case studies generally are not going to give you anything super useful. Do you have an example of something that you were looking for that maybe you got stuck on? That might be easier for me to address.
Sure. There's a few I was doing recently for the Maji Center. I was looking at Gymshark. I was looking at a few smaller clothing brands, and I was like specifically doing competitor research. So looking at case studies, because I search up the term case study because I'm looking for a business analysis on kind of their strategy or the decisions that they made. Because usually articles will say it's more like an opinion piece, but I'm looking for more like an academic paper would be perfect, but I can rarely find stuff like that. So looking for really analytical analysis on the decisions that they made.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of LinkedIn for that kind of stuff. So LinkedIn, you'll get a lot of professionals who will basically write up. It's a way of showcasing their skills, but they'll lots of times do a write up on LinkedIn of something, let's say, to do with the sports category of the garment industry, right? So that's, I would look for things like that. Is who are some thought leaders or some influential people in that industry specifically, and what are they talking about? What are they crowing about? Because people like to brag. People are looking for those that sweet social media cheddar, and sort of like, how do I look good? So they're going to talk about the clever things that they've done. So I'd be again, sort of like reading the tea leaves. So pick the category. So the term case study is rarely going to come up in that context. It's probably going to be lessons learned. They're going to use phrases like lessons learned or outcomes, or so it's just sometimes using a different phrase for a case study, because really what you want to pick up on is what did they try and what worked. So a case study is one way of describing that, but there are lots of other terms that you could use to look for that same information. So I would say in that case, find the thought leaders that are out there in the garments industry. And so sometimes you got to go a bit broader. It might be, rather than specific companies, it might be an industry, the garments industry, or a segment within the garments industry. Like fast fashion is something we talk about, like the Gap or Boathouse, right? So fast fashion is totally different than like a Holt Renfrew. So they're going to have different strategies, different campaigns that they run, different things like that. So I'd be looking at the segment and the sub-segment for that industry and see what thought leaders in that space are talking about.
Maybe speakers at trade shows as well, those kinds of folks to follow.
Yep. Yeah, that earlier I mentioned conferences for that industry. Look at who the keynote speakers are, and see if you can get an idea of what they were going to talk about. And that'll give you some clues. Because lots of times those talks that they do at the conferences are just reused content that they've already posted on LinkedIn. People are lazy. Like, that's the number one secret for journalists, is people are lazy. Like, that is your best friend when it comes to this stuff. So if somebody's written something once, they're going to try and reuse it 6 or 7 times. You just got to figure out where they've published it before. Laziness is your friend. All right, any other questions?
So like my area of business is like really technical, and a lot of times I don't like research like as to how far advanced these companies are in terms of like developing their strategy for implementing, let's say, like quantum computing, whatnot. Like how do you get like reports that show like how advanced they are?
That's a really hard thing to quantify. Quantum computing is actually a topic I've spent some time on. I was involved with D-Wave early in their conception. So quantum computing, for example, let's talk about highly technical tech commercialization fields, because I think that's a specific case. And in that case, I'd be going to something like Google Scholar. And again, you want to relate it back to who is involved at the company, because a lot of those highly technical people at that company are also academics, and they're publishing. They're publishing patents, they're publishing academic peer-reviewed journal articles, and lots of times they will give that stuff away. So I just started on a project recently for Laurentius Energy Partners, which is a spin-off of Ontario Power Generation. They use nuclear waste to make medical isotopes. So in the call, the initial call, the guy happened to mention that there was this lutetium-177 isotope that becomes a cancer treatment drug. And I went to Google Scholar immediately and said, what's happening with lutetium-177? And I found a really deep paper written by a guy named Dash in 2015 that talked all about how one takes a target molecule, puts it in a CANDU reactor, gets it bombarded with neutrons that then turns it into a medical isotope that's useful for cancer treatment. I've learned the half-life was 6.5 days, all this good stuff. So then the next time I sat down with the guy, I was able to have an intelligent conversation with him about the state of where they were at Laurentian Energy Partners, because I'd found a fundamental piece of research. And it turns out Dash, the guy who wrote that paper, is working with them. So it was just a coincidence that, and he's like, have you seen Dash's work? And I was like, yep, read it yesterday. You know, so it was, so I think if you're talking about highly technical fields, it's good to remember that most of the thought leaders in that field are also often academics and are publishing constantly. So go find what they're talking about, and that's probably, usually I would say, if it's being talked about in a peer-reviewed journal article and things are trending normally, I'd say 5 to 10 years out from seeing any commercial applications. Obviously, things in the life sciences can be longer, 10 to 20. Things in mechanical engineering will be on the middling end, and anything involving fundamental physics will be somewhere in the middle there.
Thank you.
No problem. But yeah, Google Scholar is your friend. Again, I want to pump the NATE library. A lot of the academic databases that you can pull up those articles with will be available through the NATE library. There's also a handy tool called SciHub, SCI-Hub, that allows you to crack the paywall on a lot of those academic journal articles, which is not against the law, contrary to popular belief, because those journal articles are supposed to be freely available because they are subsidized by taxpayers. But the publishers like to get in the middle of that and try to turn it into a paid product, even though it's free. They're like the Nestle of academic publishing.
Is there any other questions? Don't be afraid.
If you got a specific example you're looking for tips on, I'm happy to hear it. Well, at the end of the deck that Cecile's going to send out to everyone, I've put in 6 links to videos that I recorded previously. They're about 20 to 30 minutes each. One of them's on pestle analysis, so how to do pestle analysis, where to look for that data. One of them is on how to establish market hypotheses, in case you haven't done that yet. One of them's on market segmentation. So I think market segmentation is an important topic if you haven't covered it as part of this, and that's really looking at, I often like to say most businesses, you want to look at a primary and a secondary audience, right? So I'll give you another example of desk and primary research to establish that. So we had a company in the Okanagan who came to us and said, we've got this $250,000 upfit to a Ford F-350 that would allow the thing to go into absolutely inaccessible areas. Like it was like the Mars rover. It was crazy. And so they had some ideas. They're like, we think this would be good for forestry, mining, oil and gas, and utility markets. And so our first pass, we said, okay, let us help you figure that out. Our first pass was a desk research approach, where we said, they've got a hypothesis here that operators in these 4 industries have this very specific need, which is to get into really remote, inaccessible areas with equipment and men. What we found, we were able to very quickly eliminate utilities, because when we looked at, from our desk research perspective, when we looked at what is the operational reality of utilities, most of it is on the distribution side, which is that last mile. You know, you've got a power meter on the side of your house or your apartment, the power comes in there. That line that runs from your house or your apartment to the main junction, that's the distribution network, right? Most of that is in cities. Most of that is fed by high tension wires, which are on nice groomed right-of-ways. Gas pipelines, same thing. They're not running through the middle of a mountain pass typically. They're usually raised above the ground in areas where a right-of-way has been established, or it's buried under the ground in a right-of-way. You can get at those with a regular truck. You don't need the Mars rover to get at those things. So desk research right away was able to eliminate that. That left us with oil and gas, mining, and forestry. That's when we went to our primary research methodology, which is doing what some of you have already done, which is calling around and saying, hey, does this sound like something you'd be interested in? What do you think? And all three of those industries loved the idea, but the forestry industry went, ugh, we can't pay for that kind of, we're way too cheap. We buy $45,000 Ford F-150s and we drive them until they're falling apart, and then we get another one. We're not going to spend 250 grand on a pickup truck. That's insane. Whereas the mining guys that we talked to said, we'll take 6. Where do we send the purchase order? So from a market segmentation perspective, we were then able to go, okay, your primary market for this particular technology is going to be mining, and the secondary market's going to be oil and gas, because they had a need there as well, but it was a lesser need than what the mining guys had. So that's also good to know when you're going through this process. There's going to be, we had another, actually this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, but you guys might find the story interesting. Most people do. So we had a company come to us with a, for female to male transsexuals, it is a prosthetic penis that is used to combat body dysmorphia. So for people who are trans, there's a real problem with a condition called body dysmorphia, where if you feel inside you like you're actually a man, but you're born a woman biologically, the fact that you don't have a penis, or the vice versa, if you do have a penis and you don't want one, the fact that you can see it all the time or not see it can be quite psychologically traumatic. So this research team that we were working with actually came up with this idea to have this prosthetic penis that had a bulb that went inside the vagina that would stimulate. I don't know if you guys know this, but when babies are in the womb, all of your genitalia at some point are the same, whether you're a boy or a girl. It's all using the same material. So the testicles become the ovaries, and all the different parts get reused in different configurations depending on your biological gender. So they were operating on that principle and went, okay, so a lot of the nerve endings and the connective tissue and all that that's inside the vaginal walls is the same thing that is on the shaft of the penis. So is there a way that we could stimulate those nerves using mild electrical current and have a phallus that produces a signal and translate that into something that feels like you have an actual penis? And it turns out you can. Now, the interesting thing about that was the female to male transsexual market is very, very small. There are only a few hundred in all of Canada. So that starts to become a problem from a market sizing perspective, right? What we did find, though, from our research was that rising in popularity is a sexual practice called pegging, where a female partner inserts herself into a male lover. And a lot of women who are into that have much more disposable income than trans people do. So part of what we were able to do is sort of come at it from like the Tom Shoes perspective, where they do that. I think they still do it, where they buy one pair of shoes and you give another pair of shoes to somebody in need in overseas. This was kind of the same idea. So if you buy a prosthetic penis, we will give another one to somebody else who actually can't afford to have one. Now, the medical and psychological, and I know this might seem like a funny topic, but these are real issues that people in this community face, and it can be devastating psychologically for them. They have an incredibly high suicide rate. And the alternative that they have is going for a gender reassignment surgery, which costs $50,000 and has a very high fail rate. So the opportunity here was to create this device that was, I think it was around $350, that would avoid the need for the surgery. But the challenge was, how do you create a commercially viable product for a segment that's that small? Well, here's where that secondary market comes in. Do the Tom Shoe thing. Can I have one group that can afford this subsidize the cost for another group that can't afford it, and still be able to do something really important and meaningful for that community while making money? So market segmentation can be really important for things like that. And I just picked that example because it's interesting to talk about. There's lots of really boring market segmentation case studies I could have given, but the product name, it was haptic, which I thought was quite clever because it's haptic feedback, but they managed to work dick into it. So I thought whoever was working on the marketing for that was pretty smart. Also, one of the videos I put in was about total addressable market, because that is, I don't know if they are showing you guys how to do that, but knowing how to calculate what is the size financially of that market that you can talk to. I've included a video on that. I also got some hot tips on where to look for market assessment data, and I know we already did competitive analysis, but I did a short video I did on competitive analysis as well. So I hope that if you have a chance to check that stuff out, that you find it useful. Yeah, I've kind of run out of things to say.
There's a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, great.
Peter has a question, and then we'll go over to Carrie.
Okay, lay it on me.
Hi, Aaron. I just had a question. You mentioned avoiding some of that market research from some of the companies in India that were kind of the boilerplate.
Yeah.
Are there any other companies or any kind of companies, anyone that has kind of red flags that you encounter as well, just to kind of avoid, just so people don't waste their.
No, I think an indicator, a good indicator, is if you look at quite often you'll see they're really big on press releases. So if you're finding places like IBIS World and Statista, they don't put out press releases every time they issue a report. So I think that's sort of a red flag. If you're on Reuters or whatever, or Newswire is where a lot of this stuff comes up. Such and such report for 2024 to 2027 on, so things you'll see is like they'll give a date range, market forecast for something hyper specific. They do a press release on it, and it's for like 2024 to 2028. Those all tend to be the same kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them do come from places outside of India. India's just sort of got the corner on the market. I'm not saying all of them come from India, but they're sort of the 800-pound gorilla in that space. But that's the stuff you want to watch out for. If they're spending way too much time on press releases trying to sell that stuff, that's not usually a good sign.
Okay, thanks.
They're almost too good to be true. That's the other thing. If you see it and you're like, wow, this is exactly what I was looking for, that probably means it's too good to be true. It means somebody's trying to sell you one of these book reports.
Awesome, thanks.
I think we had one more.
Sorry, I was on mute. Carrie had a question for how old your data should be. What's the general rule of thumb?
I mean, it really depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you're looking for general population statistics, how population trends are changing over time, decades worth is fine. But if you're looking for something that's moving a lot quicker, like technological change, economic change, I would say for most of that pestle stuff you're going to look at, I would not go further back than about 2 years. Anything older than 2 years, I do the same with the Google Scholar. When I'm going in and looking at Google Scholar, looking for peer-reviewed articles, I tend not to go further back than 2 years because there can be something that was published in the 70s that might be a reference, but if it is a major milestone reference study, it's going to be cited in every other study that's published since. So yeah, I would focus on stuff in the last 2 years. Now, government statistics are hard because the census only comes out every 3 or 4 years. So a lot of population statistics, I think the most recent was 2020. And some of the really detailed analysis is going to go back to 2016 because that was the one before. So in some cases, you got to make do with what's available.
Awesome. Any other questions before we let Aaron go? Nope. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate you giving your time today and sharing this with us, because I know this is a daunting task for many of our students and for many people. It's just how to tackle this beast. And so we really appreciate you sharing this. And students, I will be sending out a survey with a link to Aaron's slides if you're looking for a copy of the pitch deck that his deck with the links he provided.
They're at the last 2 pages of that deck. So if you're looking for them, they're at the very end.
Oh,
Awesome.
Hey, you guys. I thought I'd add something in real quick. So I'm in the Alden Brown forum pitch thing right now, and I just went to a mentoring session this morning. They were saying that to access grant money, you need to think of don't think of like you have a business you're trying to get money for, like I'm a girl, I'm disabled, I'm sexual oriented, whatever. You have to think about what kind of project you're doing. So I feel like this market research is super critical. Like to help narrow down what it is you're trying to accomplish with something. Like, do you need a marketing plan? Then you would apply for a grant for marketing. Or do you need like tech for something? Then you would apply for a tech grant. And so I really think that this can help students like maybe access money when it comes time for that too. And you have to really look ahead to what you need. So you might not need the money exactly right now, but in 6 months, if that's what you need, you have to start looking around for these things. So anyhow, I don't know if that's useful or appropriate.
No, you're absolutely right, Nikki. A lot of our clients use the work that we do to get government grants. One of the more popular ones is the Industrial Research Assistant Program through Industry Canada, or the National Research Council, sorry. IRAP money can provide up to, I think, $3 million for the commercialization of a technology-based product. But one of the first things they're going to make you do is a market assessment. Show them that there is actually a market for this. If you can show them that there's a market for the thing that you're trying to build, they will write you checks.
So if I can jump in here, if anybody is interested in grants or funding for their business, come talk to me. I've got a big list of every grant and fund available for students or anybody else. Happy to have a meeting with you or exchange emails about what that might look like for you.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, Nikki, for adding that. And everybody, can you join me in thanking Aaron for his time today? It was really amazing and it helped us tackle a beast that we were afraid of.
Yeah, and it's going to be okay. I mean, it's you know, when you're going through this, just remember any information is better than no information. So if you can't find the perfect thing, don't sweat it. Doesn't mean you failed. It just means, you know, I often have to have these pep talks with my team where they're like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible researcher. I couldn't find that one specific thing, like that sportswear case study you were talking about. It's okay. If you're all really smart, if you can't find it, there's a really strong possibility it doesn't exist. It's not that you're stupid. It's that maybe it's not out there. So then it's like, okay, you dust yourself off and you go, let's try something else. Plan B, plan C, plan D, you go all the way down to plan Z if you need to. But don't spin. That would be my one final parting thought is don't waste a ton of time spinning your wheels if you're not finding the thing. Stop, move off of that, maybe put it in a parking lot, try something else. Keep pivoting. If you're not finding the thing, try a different strategy. And pick up the phone, call people and go, hey, I'm a student, I'm looking for this. Can you help me find that? You'd be shocked at how willing people in industry and government are to give you time to help you figure something out. It's quite incredible, actually.
Awesomeness. And it's true even when you're looking for work, guys, and making connections. It's all when you're a student, be proactive. Later on, it's too late. Okay, everybody have a great afternoon. And again, thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. Bye, everyone.